From the campus of Yale University, this is Business Talk with Jim Campbell, nationally syndicated across the country on the Biz Talk Radio Network and coming to you from our flagship stations, Yale Radio WYBC and 1490 AM WGCH Greenwich. All talk and all business, 60 minutes of radio with leading figures from the world of business along with the business of politics and sports. Remembrances of a remarkable man, the former governor of New York who excelled in the poetry and prose of public service. We're talking about Mario Cuomo today on Business Talk with Jim Campbell. And William O'Shaughnessy, he's the owner and president of Whitney Media, the parent company for WVOX and WVIP community radio stations in Westchester County, New York. He's the author of 4 successful books, Vox Populi, More Riffs, Rants, and Raves. It All Comes Back to Me Now on Airwaves. And his 5th work, a tribute to his longtime friend of 38 years, Mario Cuomo, Remembrances of a Remarkable Man. Bill, welcome. Good to have you here.
Jim Campbell, would you do my eulogy?
Well, let me tell you something. Talking about an Irishman doing a eulogy, 2 of my daughters have married Irish guys, and my wife is Irish. And as Cardinal Dolan apparently said this, I read in your book, it takes an Irishman to understand an Italian-American statesman, eh?
Well, His Eminence, the Cardinal Archbishop of New York, was very nice to show up at. We had a book party just 2 weeks ago. Your friend and producer and my friend of many years, John Iannuzzi, was there, and with his rich wife, and the Cardinal was very generous. He's quite an interesting man, really is. And Mario Cuomo, you should know. First of all, Mario was over the moon about the Pope, the Holy Father, the Argentinian Jesuit. Mm-hmm. But he had a candidate. And his candidate was none other than His Eminence Timothy Cardinal Dolan. Uh-huh. And I tried to distract him. And I once said to him, he said something very profound. And I said, damn it, you should have been a cardinal. And it was the first time I've ever heard Mario Cuomo at a loss for words. But when he was talking about Dolan, when they were looking for a new pope in the Curia and the Consistory, I said, listen, let's run a ticket. Cuomo for pope, Mariano Rivera for vice pope. And Mario thought for a minute. He said, if he'd just show me how to hold that cutter just once.
Well, Dolan's a big baseball fan, too, so the whole thing holds together. Now, let me ask you, this is almost a bromance between you and Governor Cuomo, sort of strange bedfellows at first sight. How did you get so close to him? How did you know him?
Well, it didn't start off well because he was Secretary of State, Jim Campbell, at an obscure office. Nobody knows what the hell the Secretary of State does in New York, and perhaps in all the other states you cover, but if they have such a job. But I kept him waiting in the lobby of our radio station in Westchester, and not nearly as influential as Yale Radio, I might add, or WGCH or your other station. But and he never let me forget it. And I got him mixed up with another. My Irish grandmother used to call them Italians, and another guy, John Santucci, the district attorney of Queens for many years and forever, it seemed. So we went down to the studio, and we got talking about capital punishment. And to Mario's great credit, and his predecessor, Hugh Carey, Governor Hugh Leo Carey of New York, was against capital punishment. And Mario continued the tradition. And I said to him, I think, as I recall, your God told you to be against capital punishment, didn't he? And we had the guy running against you for governor, a very rich guy named Louis Lehrman. Mm-hmm. I think he's one of your neighbors.
Yeah, he's a Greenwich guy.
And he was using the Bible to justify capital punishment. And Mario Cuomo looked across the microphone, and he said, Brother Bill, first time he's ever called me that, he said, O'Shaughnessy, even a Republican who doesn't wear socks can understand this. Vengeance doesn't work. Very simple. And our eyes met and locked, Jim, and I wanted to flee from that studio, get the hell out of there. And I quickly, mercifully, the interview came to an end. I hope you don't say that about me.
You know, it's funny that vengeance doesn't work. It really hit me reading that in the book, because he right after 9/11, we got into these endless wars, and that have not really gone the way that we expected. And the Middle East is all destabilized. So it's kind of interesting. He seemed to be right, which leads me into this question: would he be turning over in his grave right now with this presidential election? Lack of civility, lack of trust, unlikability. How would he feel about this?
You know, I love the man, and I tried, Jim. That's a great question. I tried to think. First of all, I don't know how he would have reacted to the. I think with shock and just disbelief to the vulgarity of this election. And I tried to remember Mario as a friend, standing there, and now we pause for a moment, a word from Cialis. You know, with all the people applying, we'll be right back with another debate. I there's one line I heard this, the greatest line in the debate, I think, and I would have called him immediately, and he would have been on the floor. The greatest line ever uttered was the late, great Abraham Lincoln.
You know, he almost seems like the anti-Trump, you know, that service to others, be the best guy running if you're going to run, a moral authority. It just seems like he would be almost the anti-Trump.
Exactly. But you know, and Hillary as well, she had a great line in that debate. Because of Donald Trump, bullying has gone up in our schools. You know, it's they match each other. But Mario Cuomo had an exquisite and a very graceful soul, and he would have been appalled at all this. How he would have reacted, I don't know, Jim. That's a great question.
Why did he not run for president? It kind of reeks sometimes of false humility. I'm not good enough, or the excuse that the plane was running but the budget was a few hours behind. Why didn't he run?
Well, that I've been asked that question 1,000 times, and I tried to answer it in my book, Remembrances of a Remarkable Man. Mario used to say, you got to look in the mirror and say, that guy is better than anyone in this country to run the nation with all its issues and problems. And he said, I could never get to that point. Most other politicians today would throw their mother-in-law over the side to get the power. But he always was fleeing from that. Always, I mean, Mario Cuomo was a stunningly, staggeringly bright man. But in my book, I'm drawn again and again to the soulful issues, the spiritual issues. I argued that he had gone beyond being governor, deciding how many Bob's Big Boys to put on the New York State Thruway, and everybody used to say, well, what did you talk about? Well, we talked about our sons and our souls, and not usually the fleeting and temporal issues of the day. We talked about Thomas More, and we talked about he used to go off on these riffs, and I say, please stop. You're wasting this on my meager Irish dunderhead brain.
You're listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell of the Business Talk Radio Network, 350 stations around the country. And coming next, the failed ball player with too many vowels. We'll look into early Cuomo. And we're back with Whitney Media owner and Mario Cuomo confidant, Bill O'Shaughnessy. And you're a great student of history. Take us back and give us a sense of the impact of his immigrant parents, because it's really well put together in the book, and you really get a sense of how poor they were.
He used to talk about his father, Jim, and in his first inaugural, the first 10 minutes in, he was kind of like glued to the teleprompter. And then about 10 minutes into it, Mario Cuomo exploded all over the room, and he became Mario Cuomo. And instead of talking to the national press, this is in Albany, in the great hall named for Nelson Rockefeller, his predecessor. And he started talking to his father. He said he literally bled from the bottom of his feet. His father came to this country to dig sewers. They called them trenches, but they were sewers. And he worked around the clock. And somehow his father wound up owning a grocery store in Queens. And Mario Cuomo lived in the back of the grocery store. Actually, they worked for a Jewish man, a man named Kessler, who was a very kind and good man. And Mario Cuomo became an impresario of the English language. But as a child, he didn't speak a word of English. And, I mean, he grew up to move words around like Nelson Riddle arranged notes. And Sinatra, his phrasing was as good as Sinatra's. Governor was governor. The Japanese, and he hit the sibilant S as well as Sinatra, your eyes, and polka dots and moonbeams, which incidentally was one of Mario Cuomo's favorite songs. I have a chapter in the book, Remembrances of a Remarkable Man, about his favorite songs. You asked me very good questions, Campbell.
Let me ask you, on the work ethic, by the way, the bled from hands was pretty profound. I liked that you said his mother, no matter how high Cuomo got in the political world, she constantly wanted to know why he couldn't make a car when she'd heard about this guy, Lee Iacocca.
You have read the book. They're at the White House, and Mario Cuomo swears till his last breath that Ronald Reagan mistook him for Lee Iacocca. He was also mistook for, and I was out in Las Vegas with him one day. This lady came up and raved about it. Said, "Can I take a picture with my friend? I want you to be. I love you. You're fabulous, Al D'Amato." Oh. And but his mother, Jim Campbell, you're right on the best story of all. He said, "Mom, he thought I was Lee Iacocca." She said, "Who's the Lee Iacocca?" He said, "Mom, he makes cars. He's very rich." He was governor. He said, his mother said, "Well, you know how to make a car, Mario."
Tell us now, another great story, I think, is the failed ball player with too many vowels. A lot of people don't know that Cuomo was a good ball player, but tell us about that and all the different names.
When Mario always, Jim, wanted to go out sliding across home plate with an inside the park home run, he used to ask me, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I just want to be at third base," the third base coach saying, "Come on, Mario, you can make it." And when he left us, dying is something you have to do all by yourself. There are no cohorts, no accomplices. It's really a solo act. except perhaps in the case of this one special Italian. And Jim Campbell, you were right. I dedicate the book to a failed baseball player with too many vowels in his name. But when Mario slid across that home plate for the last time, he took with him several legendary ball players, and I'll give you the names: Glendy LeDuc, Matt Denty, Connie Cutts, and the incomparable Lava Always Hot Libretti. I'll tell you, Campbell, where these names came from. They came from the dusty sandlots of Queens. And when Mario was playing sandlot baseball, you could only be on one team at one time. But he loved baseball, and he was great at it until he got into big-time baseball, and that's another story. But they were all nom de plume of Mario Cuomo. All those guys I've mentioned were Mario, Matthew, Cuomo. And there was another, we used to talk about these colorful characters in his old neighborhood, and one marvelous name stays. A distinguished gentleman he used to tell me about named Mr. Cat Killer Cardone. That was most assuredly not Mario Cuomo, but the name stays. I love it. Cat Killer Cardone.
You say this in the book, and it just seems a perfect fit for him, that his favorite play was the bunt, which is actually a sacrifice.
That's absolutely right. And that really appealed to him. In that same chapter, Jim, there's Gay Talese, who's a really great writer. And Gay Talese came to one of my earlier book parties for your friends at Fordham. And it was again at Le Cirque. And Mario Cuomo was speaking, and he saw these guys, Gay Talese and the late Peter Moss and Ken Auletta, who was at this book party last week. And he said, don't let those guys in. Stop. They can't come in. They'll expose Bill O'Shaughnessy for the fraud he is. No real writers allowed in the damn place. And I used to ask Gay Talese, why don't you write about Cuomo? Gay Talese is a very elegant man. He's now 81 or 82, and I used to grab him by the pick stitching on his lapel. His wife is a Nan Talese, very famous publisher, has her own imprint. Well, you did Sinatra. His famous stories, which you will remember in Iannuzzi, your producers certainly will remember them, about Joe DiMaggio, and called Joe DiMaggio Has a Cold. And these are all in Esquire magazine. And he also wrote of Sinatra. And I said, you got to do Cuomo. And just before the book went to press, 2 or 3 days, I was at a black tie dinner at 21, and lo and behold, I'm seated next to Talese. And he said the following, Jim. He said, Mario didn't run for president because he came from village people like me. We're from the South, Calabria. That's like being from the South in this country is different. It's made up of villages. We're village people. We're not national. This is why he didn't run for president. We're all from southern Italy, our parents, our grandparents. We like to stay close to home and sleep in our own bed. Sinatra, Lady Gaga, DiMaggio, Tony Bennett. Mario was the best of the village people, said Gay Talese that night. He was the crown jewel of Italian immigration. He always asked me why I didn't write about him. Truth is, I didn't want to hurt him. I admire him so much.
Coming next, the man of words.
In many ways, we are a shining city on a hill. But the hard truth is that not everyone is sharing in this city's splendor and glory. A shining city is perhaps all the president sees from the portico of the White House and the veranda of his ranch, where everyone seems to be doing well. But there's another city. There's another part to the shining city. The part where some people can't pay their mortgages, and most young people can't afford one. Where students can't afford the education they need, and middle-class parents watch the dreams they hold for their children evaporate. In this part of the city, there are more poor than ever, more families in trouble, more and more people who need help but can't find it. Even worse, there are elderly people who tremble in the basements of the houses there. And there are people who sleep in the city's streets, in the gutter, where the glitter doesn't show. There are ghettos where thousands of young people without a job or an education give their lives away to drug dealers every day. There is despair, Mr. President, in the faces that you don't see, in the places that you don't visit, in your shining city. In fact, Mr. President, this is a nation. Mr. President, you ought to know that this nation is more a tale of two cities than it is just a shining city on a hill. Maybe, Mr. President, if you visited some more places, maybe if you went to Appalachia where some people still live in sheds, maybe if you went to Lackawanna where thousands of unemployed steel workers wonder why we subsidize foreign steel. Maybe, Mr. President, if you stopped in at a shelter in Chicago and spoke to the homeless there. Maybe, Mr. President, if you asked a woman who had been denied the help she needed to feed her children because you said you needed the money for a tax break for a millionaire or for a missile we couldn't afford to use.
And that, of course, the famous 1984 keynote address of Mario Cuomo, which gives me chills to this day. And in fact, I find it amazing that that speech is over 30 years ago, and I remember it as it is today. We're talking with William O'Shaughnessy. His book just out, Mario Cuomo, Remembrances of a Remarkable Man. Tell us about that. And I know in your book you say that wasn't his favorite speech, though.
You know, I just listened to that yet again, and you get chills, and I get almost short of breath when I hear it. He always said it wasn't his greatest speech. I have in the book some others, Jim, including one at Yale. He gave a speech. Your listeners on Yale Radio will maybe some of them will remember. It was very thoughtful, as this was the convention speech, as we call it. It was very soul-searching as well. The Chubb Fellowship Lecture. I expect they still give it. It was in a theater in downtown. You probably remember which one. On February 1st of 1985. And he titled it, A Poor Si Muove. And the speech, Jim, dealt with the counterproductive tendency we have to exalt glib ideology over good, time-tested ideas. It was in a New Haven amphitheater, as I've said, and he reminded Yale's best and brightest, as you do often on this program you do so well and reaches so many influential people, and many New England political and civic leaders were there that night. And he was trying to tell them, well, while programs and policies change, our principles don't. And in a memorable passage from that speech, he begged the audience and the nation not to abandon his principles, even in the face of the big national Republican victories of the previous year. There were scholars and students, and the audience paid rapt attention as Mario reminded them. Here's what he said, if you'll allow me. Galileo, this is in New Haven, described the world as he saw it. a world that circled the sun in constant orbit. But many people had trouble accepting this, for they were taught that the Earth was the very center of the universe and never moved. Galileo had challenged their perception of the universe, which came dangerously close to challenging the very basis of their faith. This can't be. And this occurred during the terrible time of the Inquisition. And Galileo, you recall, was actually forced to kneel before a high tribunal of elders, royalty, and scholars and theologians, and renounce and retract his ridiculous assertion, bordering on heresy, that the earth moved. With the elders of the tribunal looking down, they made him say that the earth was stationary because God created it that way. Galileo knelt and with great pain and reluctance, said Mario Cuomo, spoke the words. They forced him to speak. He denied that the earth orbited, but the sun. But as he arose, as he got to his feet, those around him heard him say in a quiet voice, but still it moves. And just as Mario ordered those words, a student in the upper balcony, unable to contain himself, leaped to his feet and shouted, "Bravo, Mario!" The stunned audience froze for a moment and again cast their eyes on the lectern where Mario, without missing a beat, screamed back, "Thank you, Bart Giamatti."
A Yale man, right? Yeah.
He was president of Yale.
Yes, of course.
And later commissioner of baseball.
A job that Cuomo wanted too, right?
You're absolutely right. You're a smart man.
Let me ask you about another speech. It kind of represents the way he tried to reconcile his faith with the political tolerance and laws. The abortion speech at Notre Dame, which you say, which also amazed me, he spent 1 month on preparing that speech.
He did, and they're on an airplane going out with the great Jimmy Breslin, who's now 87 years old, years young. And his son, Kevin, sent me a picture of Jimmy reading this book of ours. And they're on a plane, and it hit rough air. Tim Russert, the late Tim Russert, was on that plane with Matilda Cuomo. And bam, it went down and down and down after this patch of terrible turbulence. And Mario didn't even look up. But some orange juice spilled on his master copy in the orator type, the big type, so he could see it before the Notre Dame speech. And Jimmy Breslin said to him, "Mario, is it possible God is telling you, don't make this damn speech?" And so they got to, some students picked them up in a car, raced them to the president's, Father Hesburgh, Father Ted Hesburgh, his guest residence. And Matilda had to go in and take the speech and dry it with a hairdryer because it's soaked in orange juice. But Mario gave this speech, and it was, as you know, Jim, it was that it's all right to be a Catholic, but you can't force that on everybody. That was the theme of the speech. And a lot of people misunderstood. They thought that Mario Cuomo was for abortion, but I've talked to him about it 100 times, and he was strong against abortion. He knew it was murder, and that he hated the violence, the very notion of abortion, the vulgarity of it. And to this day, people think he was pro-abortion.
In 30 seconds, which is kind of tough, he was big into philosophers too. Teilhard, who was a Jesuit, and folks like that. Unlike most politicians,
he believed, as Teilhard did, that God created the universe, but that's your job to finish it. He didn't complete the universe, and he went back to the ancient Hebrew teaching, tikkun olam, and tzedakah. We're all brothers. We're all in this together. But you got to help God complete the universe.
A great way to end the segment. And we'll finish up looking at the legacy of Mario Cuomo. And we're back for our final segment with Bill O'Shaughnessy, broadcasting owner, a local radio legend. I guess I'm just going to ask you broadly to start off, and the modesty fits. You say in the book he didn't want anything named after him, no bridges, monuments, but a stickball alley in Queens. How would you sum up Mario Cuomo's legacy?
I think, I'm sure of it, in fact, Jim Campbell, that hundreds of years from today, when the dust of centuries has fallen over our cities, I'm persuaded that people will discover anew his writings, his musings, his thoughts, and say, there was someone. I'm not sure they're going to remember Donald Trump or even Hillary Clinton, but I think they'll look back hundreds of years and find anew Mario Cuomo's speeches. He gave about 700 of them. He wrote 8 books, translated into many languages. One of his books is called More Than Words. My poor effort, I'm grateful for your attention and your time, and a lot of people are discovering my modest effort. But the best part of my books are the words of Mario Cuomo. And I've often said I'm not worthy to loose the strap on his sandal when it comes to the mother tongue or English language. It's not a biography. My poor effort, Jim.
I say this, though, and I'll ask you in the context of, did he give up a chance of greatness by not reaching the presidency? But I like a quote that I think that you wrote this in a letter. Mario Cuomo might not be good enough for Mario Cuomo, but he's more than good enough for the rest of us.
Yep. I used to argue that he's, again, going beyond governor of New York and with the minutia of government. The world knows he famously said, you campaign in poetry, you govern in prose.
Yeah.
I was always more attracted to the prose, Prose, of Mario Cuomo. That's the great soulful spiritual issues is what's going to linger, not the fleeting contemporary temporal issues. He really sailed beyond that. He was a better governor people gave him credit for. They say he used to say he suffers from the dumb blonde argument, which goes, he's so glib, so articulate, he can't possibly good at the minutia of governance. But boy, he was right on it. He was a brilliant guy. He was as good a technician and tactician as his son and heir, if you'll allow me. I don't want to get in trouble with Andrew.
I want to ask you a question about that, too. I guess in the eulogy, Andrew says he gets a sense of redemption for winning the governorship after Mario lost his last time. What's their relationship is if you put him on the couch?
First of all, I was quoted in the New Republic and several places that it's not easy being Mario Cuomo's son. When you're in the family business is words and concepts and notions in the political arena. When the Boston Globe says your father is the philosopher, statesman of the American nation, that's heavy stuff, and I can't use the word on Greenwich or Yale radio station or some of your other high-class stations, but that's heavy stuff, and you know the word I'm eliminating, to lay on a son, that your father is. So Andrew gave the most brilliant eulogy in that Jesuit church on Park Avenue, where just earlier they had buried Oscar de la Renta. They eulogized de la Renta for the elegance of his eye. But Andrew gave a perfect eulogy. You only get to pray over your father one time, and you better get it right. And Andrew gave a eulogy that even Mario couldn't have done better. And I'm capable of no higher praise. in his best moments, Andrew Cuomo resembles his father. And I wouldn't write him off just yet. I think Andrew is coming into, he's a brilliant strategist and technician, we know. But Andrew is more. I think we're going to hear from Andrew.
That's interesting. And you can read that whole eulogy in Bill's book. What is your opinion on President Clinton wanted him to put him on the Supreme Court? What's your thought on that, whether he should or should not have done that?
I was in a place called Lyford Key, where a lot of your high-class listeners...
That's a nice place.
It is. And my companion said it's $8 a minute. And I said, he's paying for it. And he asked me about, I sensed that Andrew and his wife Matilda wanted him to take the appointment. And Stephanopoulos George, with whom I serve on the board of the Broadcasters Foundation, he kept calling, Andrew, will he take it? What's he going to do? So Mario asked my opinion. I said, it's beyond, way above my pay grade. He said, come on, O'Shaughnessy, you got an opinion on damn near everything. I said, first of all, if you do the majority opinion, write for the majority, the Times will give you 3 paragraphs. If you write the dissent, they give you, if you're lucky, 1. And I don't like the idea that what Bill Clinton giveth, Justice Cuomo, appointed by Bill Clinton, Justice Campbell, appointed by Ronald Reagan, Justice Iannuzzi, appointed by somebody. And he said, O'Shaughnessy, you're impossible. And he said, it's a great job. You don't even have to wear underwear. And then he hung up on me. And then the next day, Andrew called Stephanopoulos and said, George, we're not going to do this.
Fascinating. As we get down, how would you sum him up? And I in my own mind, I see this Hamlet on the Hudson, tortured kind of individual in many ways. How would you put a wrapper around him? I
think his favorite word, Jim, and you are some interviewer, Mario Cuomo would love to play verbal tennis with you, Campbell. His favorite word was sweet, as in you can build up a community, make it stronger, better, sweeter than it is. It's a word most men are not comfortable with unless they're in the apparel business, as he used to say. He was a sweet, good man with tremendous gifts. I'll tell you a quick 10-second story. I once asked an archbishop, now a cardinal, I said, why is the unease in the hierarchy with Mario Cuomo? Is it his glibness, this great man of the church, this great senior churchman said, it's not his glibness or his powers of articulation they fear, it's his goodness.
Wow, what a great way to end it. A fast hour. It's a great read, the book, and Mario Cuomo is an individual that really doesn't exist in the political world right now, a type of individual. Thanks to Bill O'Shaughnessy, the book, Mario Cuomo, Remembrances of a Remarkable Man. It's distributed by Fordham University Press. This has been Business Talk with Jim Campbell.
Thanks, Jim Campbell.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks to our national audience for listening, and we'll see everybody next Sunday on Business Talk with Jim Campbell. All right, we're now going to welcome Jon Lukomnik. Does Wall Street put its interest ahead of its customers? Are you losing a large chunk of your investment returns from stealth financial fees that line the pockets of your financial firms? Jon serves as Executive Director of the Investor Responsibility Center Institute, and he's the Managing Director of Sinclair Capital. New book just out, What They Do With Your Money, How the Financial System Fails Us and How to Fix Us, and he's giving us some time. I think he's testifying before the SEC this afternoon. Jon, how are you?
Well, thanks, Jim. I actually was doing something for the SEC Historical Society on a really geeky thing called non-GAAP measures, which are supposed to help investors understand how companies operate, but sometimes are used to mislead us. So,
yeah, in fact,
good and bad.
Aren't most non-GAAP sort of restatements now done to sort of cover up problems?
No, I mean, I don't want to get into tarring everyone with a brush. I think most non-GAAP measures are things like EBITDA,
right,
or that most people understand, and they're done for good purpose. The problem is they're they can be misused. You know, when you have one of the problems with Wall Street right now is an explosion in complexity. We see it in Wells Fargo. We see it in scandals all over the place. And anytime that you have much more complexity, people who are either sloppy or misintentioned can take advantage of it, and that's what sometimes happens with non-GAAP. So I don't want to criticize non-GAAP specifically, because often it's helpful to understand the companies, but yes, it can be misused, and the SEC has a major initiative underway right now to try and minimize that misuse, and they're putting out all sorts of comment letters and enforcement actions to do that.
Okay, interesting. Now we'll bring it down to the street, right here to Main Street.
Absolutely, please.
Right here to Main Street here. Tell us, what do you mean by the financial system is failing us?
Well, the financial system is supposed to be a service industry, right? I mean, it doesn't create housing or food or shelter or entertainment or radio. But none of that could exist at a scale without it. So it really should be measured by how well it serves society and the real economy. And by that measure, it's actually pretty inefficient. It costs about 2% to take money from you and me, of savers and investors, and put it to places that people want, like loans. That doesn't sound like a lot, but it's cost 2% for 130 years, basically the same 2%. In that time, we've invented computers. Heck, we've invented telephones, and yet it hasn't gotten more efficient. And that's because there's such an explosion of complexity. There are so many more people, and everyone has to get paid.
And in fact, 2% is actually a big number, right, when you compare it to the low inflation environment, low expected returns right now.
No, absolutely. The growth rate of the economy is not a lot. So, and I admit they're heroic assumptions, but if you held all other things equal, and it only cost 1%, we could actually be growing the economy about 25% faster. Now, the reason for that is because while the 2% that it costs us for every dollar that we actually make use of has stayed the same, the amount of the economy that the technical term is intermediate, but the amount of the economy that Wall Street touches has quadrupled in those 130 years. And so here's a stunning statistic. It is a Main Street statistic. 12% of the American economy winds up on Wall Street. So 1 out of every 8.5 cents that could be 8.5 cents out of every dollar that could be in the pockets of the rest of America is on Wall Street. Now, they do an important function. They deserve to get paid. There's always going to be a cost for that. But it could be more efficient, and that's why we say that it's failing us, because the same discipline that it insists on applying to you when you take out your mortgage, or a local banker that applies to the supermarket down the street that wants to expand, or to Apple when it floats a bond issue, it doesn't apply to itself. It could be more efficient.
Wall Street kind of takes a chain of fees, like a toll, all the way throughout transactions, especially on the retail side, and a lot of that isn't really seen by the investor. Talk about that, and is there just too much short-term focus on Wall Street?
Sure. The answer to the second question is yes, and we can get back to it. So the first, you probably have 20 or 30 fees, most of which you never see in your 401k account. So yes, you pay your money manager, and people are getting smart about that. They're going into lower cost options. But you pay your record keeper and what's called a transfer agent or a sub-transfer agent. Those accounts are audited. The board members on the money management get a fee. The trading costs are astronomical. If you invest in overseas stocks through something called American Depository Receipts, there are 2 or 3 fees on every one of those. So while you may think that you see the numbers, you really don't. And fees are important. So in today's interest rate environment, everyone talks about compounding interest. Yeah. Well, fees compound too.
Yeah.
So if you're paying even 1%, you're losing 25% of what you could have at the end of your savings life. So if you're 25 and you're saving till you're 65, and you should have $800,000 saved, you'll have $600,000 saved.
Huge difference.
Huge difference. And if you're paying more than that, if you're paying 1.5%, it's 38% off the top.
Wow.
So these fees matter, and they're not always transparent to people.
Tell us some of the fixes that you call for in this book. Obviously, making these fees more transparent, governance, etc.
Right. That. We have some 40, 50 fixes in there, and some of them are very technical. But here are the two big ones. One is there's something called fiduciary obligation, which basically means you have to be responsible to do what's best for the person whose money you're managing. And there's been a big fight about that right now, and the Department of Labor has put forth a fiduciary rule for your retirement savings. But here's the irony. If you give them your retirement savings, they will have to be fiduciaries. But if you give them your kids' college savings, they don't have to be. That makes no sense. Everyone in the chain should be a fiduciary to the beginning of the chain, the person whose money it is. And the second thing is, everyone in the chain should have to disclose their fees and make them transparent so that the market can work. You know, people say, well, don't you believe in a free market? And I absolutely believe in a free market. I've never heard an economist say a market works on opacity. Markets work when you see what's happening, when you know who's charging fees, so that you know who they're being responsive to. And if they're being responsive to the trading desk instead of to me as the ultimate investor, that's a problem.
All right, John, let's switch over to another subject. A lot of folks around here have their money in big banks like Citibank or Chase. Wells Fargo just had a major scandal, basically, to be blunt, screwing its own customers over trying to enhance cross-sell opportunities. Tell us about that, and what should we fear big banks or what?
You know, it's hard to be shocked when you write a book called What They Do With Your Money, How the Financial Sector Fails You and Fails Us and How to Fix It. So I can't say I'm shocked, but I am passionately dismayed and annoyed. Mm-hmm. For those of your listeners who aren't that familiar, I'll try to make this quick. Over multiple years, Wells Fargo retail bankers, so the people that you see when you walk into the branch bank, created phony accounts, not just a couple of phony accounts, 2 million phony accounts for customers. And why did they do that? They were under intense pressure from the top to, quote, cross-sell. So, you know, sell you overdraft protection, sell you a loan, sell you a mortgage. They boasted that they had 6.27 cross-sales per account. Well, we were talking about non-GAAP measures. Maybe those are usually adjustments. Maybe they should adjust for the ones that didn't really exist, because they created 2 million phantom accounts so that they could charge fees and then close the accounts before people realized it. It is absolutely scandalous. And what was really amazing was they seemed taken aback and taken by surprise that people would be upset by this. They announced a settlement for $185 million. To give you some sense of scale, they said it's not material because we have $20 billion in profits every year. Well, you know, yes, it's less than 1% of profits, but when you are, as you say, screwing your clients, or as the comptroller of the currency said, you know, you can't take advantage of your clients and you can't break trust with them, people react, and it slashed $20 billion from their market capitalization. So more than 100 times the amount of the fine. It has so far cost the CEO his job. It will cost more people their job. And they need a major cultural fix, because the CEO apparently knew about this for a number of years. And instead of firing the head of the retail bank who was responsible for overseeing this, he tried to allow her to retire this year. In fact, said that she was an exemplar of the bank's culture, and she would have gotten, before all the press and people found out about it, more than $100 million in retirement earnings. So they have a major tone deafness at the top as to, I said, banking and finance is supposed to be a service economy. This is a classic example of losing your sense of purpose, of messing up that initial saver, and then thinking that you're going to make up. You're just treating them as numbers and ledgers, and I'm going to cross-sell. And instead of what it's really doing is I'm committing fraud on all my customers. and they're paying the price for it now.
One thing that offended me is that 5,000 people were laid off in the branch level, but yet the CEO apparently felt that he had no personal accountability. Would you call for separating the chairman role and the CE role?
They have now separated the chairman and the CEO role. Yes, they had to. The reason that it's so particularly egregious is they fired 5,300 low-level employees for doing this over multiple years, including not so low-level employees. 500 of those were branch managers or higher. But when they initially announced this, they blamed the lower echelon, the line people. I mean, the CFO, who should also lose his job, said, quote, "It was really more at the lower end of the performance scale where people apparently were making bad choices to hang on to the job." No, what it really was you had a incentive plan based around this cross-selling that, according to the complaint from the Los Angeles city attorney, people were checking on those, quote, lower-level employees, end quote, 4 times a day. So they felt incredible pressure to attain a totally unrealistic sales goal.
I guess we don't have to ask how the financial system fails us. Let's finish up with one topic that I think might be of interest because people probably don't know much about it. But one of the outgrowths of the Dodd-Frank Act was something called the Consumer Protection Financial Bureau, which had a focus mission and has just had some of its independence curbed. I'd like you to describe what it is. Do you think it's been effective, and is the independence curb important?
Sure. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which I will abbreviate henceforth as CFPB because it's just too long to say, was created in 2011. This was Senator Elizabeth Warren's big cause, and it is designed to protect retail customers from financial entities. The legislation that had created it initially said that you could only remove the director for cause, an attempt, as you point out, to give it some independence to insulate it. As you might imagine, certain people thought this was a horrible idea, the whole bureau, not just the for cause part, and tried to use that for cause clause as a way to declare the entire bureau unconstitutional. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not going to get into it, but there's a separation of powers thing that says the president has to be able to remove people much as he can remove a cabinet secretary. So they took it to court, and the court, in fact, said, no, you can't have this for-clause thing, but you just have to fix it by having the president be able to remove the chair, the executive director. So it lost some independence, but no more so than the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of Treasury. It still exists. It has been very successful. Since it began 5 years ago, the Bureau's generated about $12 billion in financial relief and restitution for 27 million consumers, average Americans.
Yeah, I did not know that.
So that's $12 billion that people who were wronged have gotten back. So it has been effective. Now, I don't agree with everything it does. I don't think everyone agrees with everything any governmental entity does. But overall, it's been had a really salutary effect on, robo-signing of mortgages and that sort of fraud. And in fact, it was one of the signers of the complaint against Wells Fargo that resulted in that initial $185 million fine that alerted everyone to the scandal.
All right, let's finish up. You talk about moving to a more fiduciary culture, which I would say is putting customer interests first. Are you optimistic that that's a realistic thing that is going to evolve to the benefit of Main Street?
Overall, yes. That's not to say that there won't be problems. There will be. Jesse James says he robs banks because that's where the money is. You don't need a gun anymore. You need a computer. But I think that the Department of Labor's rule has already created downward pressure on fees. You have seen BlackRock, the largest investor in the world with some $5 trillion in assets, reduce the cost of their exchange-traded funds. You've seen Schwab say they're going to meet that. And so there is, you wonder, and they've deliberately said it's a result of the fiduciary rule. And so you wonder, why couldn't they have done that on their own 5 years ago? So my hope is that as people understand this, that finance, which I love, it's the business I'm in, and I think most of the people in it are really good, or they try to do really good people, really good things, but we could do better, and I would hope that finance starts encouraging long-term investing and treating its customers with respect as opposed to thinking of them as account numbers you could cross-sell against.
Great way to end it. We've been talking with Jon Lukomnik. The book is What They Do With Your Money, How the Financial System Fails Us and How to Fix It. And it'll give you good insight into what exactly is happening in the manufacturing process of your investment money. Jon, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Jim.